I'm Scott Ananian. I'm the tech lead for the Wikitext Parser Parsoid on the content transform team at the Wikimedia Foundation. And our team is broadly responsible for taking wiki text on a page, including all the embedded semantics the author has expressed, and turning it into HTML. A few other things besides, but we're primarily going to talk about the HTML today. So Parsoid is the next generation Wikitext processor. It was started in 2011. We've been maintaining it in parallel with the legacy Wikitext parser for 10 years now, and we're just about ready to retire that old code and move to the newer Parsoid code base. Of course, part of the motivation is to enable more innovation in Wikitext itself, both in the semantics it embodies, as well as the way we think about an article in terms of the composition of meaningful and typed fragments. So what is the thing we're trying to use Wikitext to express? What is the computation or analysis we'd like to present on this page? And what does that look like for an author or an editor of Wikitext? We're going to go into the weeds later on in this talk, but it's worth remembering that the big picture idea is we're trying to make it easier for authors to embed and for tools to extract semantically meaningful information, which is what you all are here at this conference to talk about as well. So just backing up very briefly, why are we replacing the legacy parser with Parsoid? What's Parsoid doing that the legacy parser isn't? The original motivation for the change is that Parsoid generates better and more semantic HTML with the information that's needed to support the modern features that Parsoid was designed for. So visual editor, content translation, first flow, and now discussion tools, keywords, mobile apps, and more. So providing all that semantic information about the article allows better editing tools, bots, gadgets, and search. But maintaining two parsers in parallel is just not feasible long term, and the legacy parser is not built in a way that allows us to implement the features we've got planned for the future. So the long-term switch is from increasingly moving away from manipulating long strings of HTML to manipulating structured DOM trees, giving a more principled semantics for how the pieces of the page are composed together, and providing types. There's still ahead of us before Parsoid supports 100% of the uses that the foundation has in production. And then even after we've turned off the last remaining user of the legacy parser at the foundation, the intent is to maintain the legacy parser as a community supported add-on, either a library or an extension you can optionally install. But so it's important to note that we're not immediately turning stuff off. There's going to be a sizable transition, but it is also the case that new feature development is going to occur only in Parsoid. Okay, so arguably we've been letting folks read Parsoid HTML for about 10 years now. Every time you open a page in Visual Editor, if you don't see things radically shift and break, then Parsoid's doing a good job for read views. And a lot of our initial work on Parsoid was focused on modeling and processing Wikitext itself. But historically, there were a number of technical factors that stood in the way of directly integrating Parsoid with core. We started the Parsoid unification project a while back to tackle these one by one. And how's that going? So as I said, Parsoid has been used for both reading and editing Wikitext from the start, in tools like Flow, content translation, keywords, and the Enterprise API. Because Parsoid is still used for editing and by all these tools, we need to support two slightly different versions of Parsoid output, one for editors with full semantic information, template boundaries, and things like that, and one for readers, which is slimmed down in some ways and has additional user interface features like section edit links and others. You don't display section edit links in Visual Editor because they don't make sense, but you do display them for readers. To support all that, Isabel on our team is building a post-processing pipeline to turn the edit mode HTML into read mode HTML. And we're going to talk about that pipeline later because it's probably going to be of interest to you all folks. But our team's main focus currently is on this rendering. It's transitioning all readers to Parsoid by using Parsoid generate HTML for the article pages that desktop readers see. And we started by bridging some gaps between legacy generate HTML and Parsoid generation HTML. years back, starting with a transition to HTML5, and then changes to the HTML that are used for media, which are embedded in the page, which Arlo on our team has led. But now we're starting in earnest to transition groups of desktop readers, starting with opt-ins, which I'll show you in a second, via the Parser migration tool. Shannon on our team has been working on that. And next in talk pages, which use the discussion tools extension, which Subbu is currently working on. So just a quick guide to the different aspects of our team and folks who are working on that as well. So this is one step where you can join us. There's now an opt-in preference on Foundation projects to use Parsoid instead of legacy Parser to render articles. I'm going to show you how to turn that on in a moment. Not everything works yet, and we have a known issues page here. I'm going to show a few of those shortly, but this also provides early access to try out Parsoid as a daily driver and find the things that we don't already know about. As well as prioritize the issues that we still have to work on. So you can do this too on your own wikis. The Parser migration extension is a very thin extension, which just adds this preference. Parsoid is integrated in core. You probably need to be running as close to the current master of WMF development as possible right now. It's technically compatible with 141. The support will be much more robust when 142 gets released. If you're running master, you can sort of play along right now. But this lets you get an early peek at how well Parsoid supports the extensions you're running on your wikis. You can install Parser migration. You can turn on Parsoid rendering and see which pages would have issues. So let me just show you how to do that real quick. Let's hopefully you're following. There you go. So if you go to any Foundation wiki on your there you go, on your user preferences, there is all the way, it's kind of buried here, all the way down at the bottom of the editing. Like there's this little section called developer tools. And you can turn on the Parser migration tools and turn on using Parsoid by default. For Foundation wikis, we also have global preferences, which I've got this turned on for everything, everywhere, all of our wikis at once. Those, you probably don't have that on your wikis, but if you want to do it on Foundation stuff, and on the first page of the preferences, there is set your global preferences, and then you just go again to the editing and scroll all the way down. But now you're talking about turning this on for every wiki everywhere. Once you've turned it on, you'll see in the sidebar here, use legacy parser. It also, the first option adds this edit migration tool page, which we've used. It's much more developer focused, but if there's a particular bit of markup which is giving you problems, this helps you sort of preview the changes and see the legacy parser side by side with Parsoid. But primarily we're talking about this. I've got this with Parsoid by default. If I click use the legacy parser, it renders to the legacy parser. Things look good. I didn't really see anything change at all. If I don't know if you can see the address bar there on the screen share, but you'll see that it adds use Parsoid equals 0 and use Parsoid equals 1 as a way to force it in the URL to use one or the other. One of the main differences right now is that the Parsoid output doesn't have section edit links here. That's going to change in a couple weeks, but it's, the moment is a handy way to tell that which parser you're actually using. All these section edit links aren't present in the Parsoid output yet. That will change. As I said, hopefully nothing changes when you click the button to switch back and forth between them. But that's a nice thing you can do right now. And if you add the Parser migration extension, it just adds that one link to your sidebar. Going to go back to the main talk. So this is the near future. What we're working on in the next, say 6 months, and probably stuff that will appear in MediaWiki 142, which is our next release. So I'm going to get a little bit more technical, mention method names and things like that. You can sort of bookmark this for later reference if you're writing code. So the big change is treating parser output as a sort of write-only interface. So there's a lot of existing extension code which does a sort of read, modify, write thing. Takes the parser output, reads some stuff from it, changes some stuff, and writes it back. And that's, for example, how variables keeps track of its state as it goes down the page. We're strongly discouraging that. There are new methods like these append methods here, which don't do a read, modify, write, just sort of add it blindly to the page. And that lets you combine the fragments asynchronously. We've talked about that in years past, so I'm not going to go too deep into the weeds on that right now. We're also working on removing parser output get text. So parser output mostly is just a sort of value object. Get text has historically done a bunch of post-processing to the text before it actually returned some stuff to you. And we're moving that post-processing to its own pipeline. Part of that is removing all the things which the different flavors of output that used to be selected by passing arguments to get text are moving into parser options where they sort of should have belonged in the first place. So there'll be a little bit of churn if you're closely following MediaWiki development as sort of things get shuffled around there. The main thing that we introduced, which just landed this past week, is a new namespace, MediaWiki output transform, which has a sort of robust post-cache transform. We're calling them post-cache transforms because historically they happened after the parser output was cached, but one of the things we're doing is adding the ability to cache some of those things. So the big picture idea here is we've had this edit flavor of Parsoid HTML, which is cached, which you use when you open the page in Visual Editor. For readers, there's a transformation that makes a that changes, that adds section edit links, for example, and does things like that. Eventually, we want that to be cached as well, just for performance reasons. But there's also the ability to add other flavors. So if you want to do post-processing on it, and in some sense, this is a way to do some of the sort of page level. If you want state on your page, you can do it as a post-processing pipeline after all the content has been rendered. Discussion Tools also does this. There's a Discussion Tools flavor, effectively, which adds their reply links and other things like that. You can imagine mobile views as being another flavor. So this is the current, the current active work. A little bit further in the future, as we've discussed before, we're standardizing on the double brace, curly brace syntax, and the oldest semantic MediaWiki code, which hooked the square brace syntaxes, will eventually go away, and we've talked about that here in previous years as well. I would like to, generally speaking, we're going to be adding more support for typed results and typed arguments to templates, which did come up in the context of array functions just now. One of the reasons that array functions is sort of base 64 encoding the JSON serialization of your data object is that sort of typed parameter passing isn't in the core yet, but we're hoping to add it. I would also like to see adding some sort of page context. So the way that array functions is currently hacking around that by creating a top-level page that just passes an argument through to the template, which basically sets the context argument for that template. I'd like to see that added as a more first-class feature, but this is further out in the future. As we talked before, we're restructuring the caching. There's going to be a more of a distinction between parse and compose steps, where compose steps can do more interesting things. We're already working on the graph extension. The compose, we're putting a sandbox in for graph, so the graph gets composed into the page in its own unique sandbox. Abstract Wikipedia wants some of its fragments because they're working on sort of more processor compute heavy natural language processing stuff. They want the ability for some of the fragments to take longer to process and to be incorporated in the page sort of asynchronously. So that's another sort of separate compose step that's sort of looking in the future. And I'm hoping to be able to spend more time on Scribuntu itself. It really hasn't had a lot of development in the past, I don't know, 5-10 years, and we'd like to sort of kickstart that again. So those are all much further out, no promises, but give you an idea of the general direction of work there. I mentioned this again, that part of this compose model is treating the transclusions as independently computed cacheable fragments. That's the motivation for some of the work on making a parser output write only, so that you're not trying to take the output of a previous fragment and do something with it. And also providing better types to plug these things together. Yeah, we also have extension template data in core, which gives more semantic information for templates for arguments to a template. I expect that we're going to be pushing on that further and expanding the sorts of things that you can use template data to denote, providing a little bit more semantic information. Some of this is driven by our desires for localization. You'd like to be able to take two templates on different wikis that are translated. We'll just say an info box on Spanish Wikipedia and an info box on English Wikipedia, and note that these two parameters, even though they're named completely differently, are the same thing, and that if you're translating the page from English to Spanish, the arguments that went in this parameter to this thing on English Wikipedia should go in this parameter to this thing on Spanish Wikipedia. In order to do that, you need to sort of provide this more semantic information about what the meaning of this argument is. And so we'll be working in that direction. Okay, more concretely for Semantic MediaWiki, this slide is, I think, verbatim from previous years. So I'm not going to talk about it more, but I wanted to keep putting it up so that keep reminding folks of this. We can talk about any bits on this slide later if folks have questions. As I said, the active work right now is on the post-processing pipeline. The idea is that caching here in the post-processing pipeline, it should be optional. It's a sort of configuration level change. So hopefully it's not in your code itself. It's just in the configuration. You say, oh, by the way, it would be useful to cache this particular flavor of the output because we expect it's going to be heavily used or something. So a lot of sequential behavior can be emulated this way, including the sort of things that the variables extension does, going top to bottom of the page. The code to do so will usually look different. So there will be some porting involved. But if you really want a sequential top-down pass over the final document, this is sort of the way that you would do it. You don't have access to a lot of the parser state. So one of the reasons it looks different is you have to, as you're parsing the page the first time, put whatever information you need in the extension data for the page, as a write-only store, just recording it all as you go down, and then in your post-processing state, you can draw from that to do your final sequential pass. We've talked about the link syntax changing before, just putting that slide up for reference. And I think your community has been working on alternatives to that for a while as well. One of the things in the Q&A session, I would love for someone to give me an update on how transition from the old syntax to the new syntax is going. We always talk about variables extension, including in the previous talk. As I've mentioned several times that the sort of central read-write store doesn't work. There are a number of parts of core which have this property, including language converter and citations, and we've been gradually going through and fixing those assumptions. Yeah, as I said, I think the array functions approach is a very interesting way to replace this, and is something that I would like to support more and more. As I said, in terms of providing core support for that sort of context object that the page is drawing from, and I'd like to support that separated data processing and layout model for templates as well. But if as approaches to make the existing variables extension work, I think it is possible to it would be almost a re-implementation, but to do it as a post-processing pass instead. I think there's some subtle semantics to how var final works, which I don't actually have in the paged in right now, but that's the sort of more interesting discussion there. Yeah, separation of presentation data, as we talked about, I think the model that array functions is using is fundamentally the right one moving forward. I will say some of these issues are things that we're trying to smooth. Embedding certain Wikitext constructs in the transclusion arguments can be tricky. We have a proposal for HereDoc arguments, which will probably get implemented in the next after Parsoid reviews sort of rolls out, but it's the next non-legacy compatible Wikitext syntax change that we're going to do. That just changes some of the rules about quoting to make it a little easier to embed chunks of Wikitext in a parameter to a function, which is what things like AF for each are doing. There are some weird corner cases with escaping that you can run into. We'd like to smooth that as much as possible. Again, as I talked about, the way that array functions is memoizing the computed data is necessary at the moment, but in general, as we sort of roll out fragment composition, we expect to be able to, for example, cache the output of array for each of AF for each independently of the rest of the page. So if you render another page which iterates over the same object in the same way, you can just sort of reuse that piece. Or if you edit some other part of the page that doesn't involve that array for each, we can just take that fragment out of the cache and slot it in. And again, I'd like to be able to pass structured data between transclusions instead of having to do just a string. So that's it for me. I'd love to take the rest of the time to talk to you all, answer questions. We can revisit some of those slides, which I went through very quickly. But the short summary is we are transitioning to using Parsoid for reviews on Foundation projects in this upcoming year. We already have that sort of opt-in ability deployed on Wiki. Once we get a little further through that, once everyone is using Parsoid to render page X, then we can start rolling out Wikitext, which only works in Parsoid, and the HereDoc syntax is probably the first example of that. Yeah, I'm excited to talk with you all. Excited about some of the work that you guys are doing and the ways we can work together on that.
Thanks, Scott. Do we have questions? Personally, I do have a question, Scott. Is there, because I think that there are a lot of benefits to the new Parsoid, to Parsoid, the new way of parsing stuff, and we are focusing on the issues and what we need to change. But where can we find, let's say, inspiring documentation or information about the new capabilities and how we can use them to make things even better?
Yeah, that was the final slides here were intended to give you a little taste of that. To be frank, we're pretty blocked on implementing fundamentally new features in Parsoid until pages will always render with Parsoid, right? So this was the main problem for our group in the past, is any new feature had to be implemented simultaneously in the legacy parser and Parsoid, which greatly complicated our implementation effort. So at the moment, we've sort of put a hold on that to unify, to do this parser unification process, so that once we have, it doesn't necessarily have to be all wikis everywhere. All you need is this page will always render with Parsoid, and we basically have the infrastructure for that now. So once certain pages can opt into using Parsoid for everything, then you can deploy new Wikitext features that only work in that context. Some of these things like extensions to template data to give better types for arguments, don't affect rendering, and so can be rolled out already. So we basically have a sort of de facto type system for parameter arguments right now encoded in template data. Template data will mark the arguments in a variety of types: integer, string, Wikitext string, all sorts of things. So like that groundwork is there, and it's just a matter of sort of building on that to, if I know the argument to this template is a if I add something that says that this is structured data, what can I do with that now? And that's something that you can imagine working in array functions. I don't think array functions uses template data at all right now, but if you wanted to add so a shortcut for AF get that would render an argument a certain way based on the type of it. You could certainly go to template data and find out what the declared type of that parameter is, and perhaps use that to guide how AF get rendered something. I'm just sort of spitballing now, but like those capabilities are basically there. We've done a lot of the infrastructure work, so it's just a matter of kind of building on that. I've got questions in the chat. Yaron had asked about Scribunto functionality. So this week is MediaWiki Code Jam, which is a sort of foundation internal initiative to work on new sections of the code base you haven't worked on a lot in the past. So I'm spending my code jam working on Scribunto. I'm not going to make any promises about it, but I do think that like the main thing that concerns me most is the fact that Scribunto is still using Lua 5.1, and we don't really have a sort of robust way of transitioning content or marking deprecated functions or sort of moving things to the future. So again, I tend to work on the basics, but I'd like to get to a point where if we deprecate a Scribunto function, we have a reasonable way of fixing all the code which uses it and knowing it, and marking a module as being Lua compatible. There's some interest in allowing other languages in Scribunto as well. I'll say the other thing that I've been interested in is the API which Scribunto exposes. Some of the frame information that Scribunto exposes we might not be able to support in Parsoid, so that's an excuse to look at how Scribunto actually integrates with the page. So I don't have any concretes, but that's just the sort of rough idea of the sorts of things that I'm personally interested in exploring. Simon, I think, had asked if we expected performance improvement just from switching to Parsoid or from parallelization in general. I think it's mostly from the performance improvement would be from composition. A lot of our if you really dig down into the performance, some of it is processing Wikitext. A lot of it is still fetching templates from the database and expanding templates, and that is fundamentally due to the fact that we don't have any more at any lower level caching, right? So when you make any change to a template or any change to a page, the entire page has to be reparsed from scratch currently. So the performance improvement, the main performance improvement is going to be when we sort of get rid of that model, more so than actually processing the Wikitext. Once we've fetched expanded all the Wikitext from all the databases where it lives, the actual Wikitext parsing is significant, but it's relatively small in comparison. JSON schema for template data. That's a really interesting thing. I worked on JSON schema for some of the annotation stuff before. I'd love to talk more about that. I don't have any solid ideas there, but that would certainly be an interesting thing. One of the I'll say one of the tricky parts is as you get more semantic, you end up with potentially more fuzzy types for semantics. So especially if you're doing natural language processing, the type that you might want to propagate with an argument might be that this is a a masculine gendered number, not just that it's an integer, or that this is a number larger than 2, right? Because that's what, if you're going to stick it in a page and have a noun which matches the number that you've just passed, those are properties which are interesting. And so I think in some sense we want to provide a multi-dimensional type system where I can say this argument is, sure, there's something crunchy and HTML specific, like this is a table cell or something. This is paragraph content. But I think in orthogonally to that, you might also want to be able to pass around information about semantic information. This corresponds to Wikidata entry X, or this is a semantic MediaWiki tag Y. And then in completely separate directions, this value is also a masculine number of quantity greater than 2 or something like that, right? So lots of types is the answer.
Question over here. No, we don't. Okay, thank you very much, Scott. And we are moving to the last presentation.
Yeah, the final thing I'll say is just I think Subbu has mentioned in the chat, we have a foundation-wide prioritization and planning process. And so, I don't want to be promising that we're working on any of these things. I think conferences like this, though, are really good for us to align priorities. So what I've sort of said is, if you're interested in working on template data, for example, these are the sorts of things the directions that we'd like to see it go in. And I would love to accept, community contributions in that direction, right? So there's on one side, I am a foundation employee, and so the things I work on are somewhat, limited by, or are directed by foundation annual planning. But I'm also eager to accept help in aligned directions. And for example, again, I think the array functions work is a really great example of that. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.